from the Tantra point of view, how to live, how to work, how to be in the world, how to be with people. For me, I've been investigating this a few years in the last period more intensely.
When you say how to be in the world, how to, from the Tantra point of view, right? Can you maybe be a bit more specific where the question itself comes from? You know, where's the dilemma in itself? Because I hear you, I understand, but so that we bring everyone in terms of where is the crux of the matter here? What is the nature of that question? Where is the dilemma? What aspect of tantric philosophy or approaches that is questionable to you, or how you try to approach it, where it comes into the relational aspect of yourself and the world?
I have been investigating a lot on what is conscious, what is consciousness, because you speak of the light. Shiva is light of awareness, the power of self-awareness. So how to be in the world, to live it fully, and also to aid in my own path to self-awareness. More specific, like for the moment I'm being very self-conscious in looking into myself when I speak to someone. From where do I speak? What does it all encompass? What are the underlying systems that I have, the patterns or the frames of references that I have embedded in me, to trying to grow into it. But is that a tantric way? Because for what I understand, Tantra is living the moment. It's just without too much investigation. And from where do I do it? Is it pure? Is it not pure? Is it limited? Is it all this kind of investigation just put aside and just live? I would imagine that to be the Tantra way. It's like also like dealing with pain, psychological pain or emotional pain, or it's maybe a very big question. I don't know.
It's a good question. Very good question. And as with most questions, of course, it depends how far we are ready to go, or how ready are we to apply what essentially could be taken with a degree of measure. Forget about Tantra now for a moment. We spoke about Tantra. So how do I live my life according to Tantra? If anything we understood, then all there is this awareness and the power to be aware of itself. And it's the very substratum, the very fabric, at the very fabric of creation, there is this inseparable aspects. Inseparable aspects. It's that silent aspect, if you will, and that dynamic aspect. It's that aspect of pure transcendence and the aspect of being embodied, even limited to all these what otherwise known as experience of an individual, limited to space, time, causation, right? Having the body above all else, it's an embodied affair. But forget Tantra for a moment. The question is how to live life, really. One way or the other, the question is how to live life. Whether we now look at it from Tantric perspective, or yesterday we looked at it from Sufi perspective, or tomorrow we'll look at it from Zen perspective, and then we'll look at it from Taoistic perspective. The question is how to live life. Isn't it? So therefore, I don't even want to begin to speak about this in terms of, how Tantra tells you how to live life. So the first level of response here would be, well, there are so many different reminders of how to live life. There are already codes of conduct there, internal and external, ethical affairs, how to be in the world with others, and how to be in that world within oneself, how to be in peace, whatever that means, or how much peace we can master with the others, and how to be at peace with oneself. And there are all these commandments, all these yamas and yamas, all these codes of conduct, internal versus external, isn't it? So already that question is answered at that level, that you know that at least you know what not to do. Even though there is this need to live, you already know that what is given as that outline, the basic outline, that ethos, the ethos of life. But that, you see, still, of course, is at the surface level of affairs. These are obviously the internal, external codes of conducts very easily translate into do's and don'ts. But that does not mean that how we live our life. Very often in our lives comes a moment when on every do there is a don't, and on every don't are 5 do's. And we are left with choices. At other times, the very little choice is given. We're simply keeping up, or barely keeping up, with what has already happened, while we try to adjust in terms of our mental department of what actually happened. You've heard that even in relation to what neuroscience came up with. Some of you may have heard that. That even raising of this hand already happened before I did it. It's not something that spoken in the scriptures. These are the latest researches. Doing that fraction before it takes place, it already happened. And that in relation to many other things. Of what will be said, or what will even be experienced. And we know that when the field of awareness undergoes some kind of radical shake-up, some people's sensibilities and sensitivities break into the territory where one begins to perceive, even if temporarily, even if just as a byproduct of sorts. When things manifest only as a result of what already took place internally. These studies are made, these are out there, you can look up these studies, that before something has happened, before something, reaching out for a glass of water and drinking it, as mundane, as simple as that, to something a bit more complex, playing tennis, Every movement already took place in your own field of consciousness before it actually took place. There is this, if you will, a delay. But the most difficult thing here is, of course, is that what is simply known as giving oneself to life before and above all else. Because giving oneself to life amounts for how to live life. Because life is already lived through you, irrespective of what you or I may think of it. Life is a tremendous affair. And while I may be busy thinking of how to live it, it's already lived. And I only move my hand after that. In other words, every thought about how to live life is a delayed reaction. And without trying to be funny about it, makes no difference to what already took place. In other words, we already live as a given before we even can have any logical, analytical, or credible understanding for why that is. Of course, one may argue, well, this is my predisposition. Some people take it for granted. Some people don't give a hoot. Some people are not even interested. These questions don't even rise to them. Yet others have that more, certainly it's a predisposition of a more evolved mind, more evolved individual, to ponder on this, to bring that into question. To bring that into question. But the question of how to live your life, if you will only be a half story, because it's really all that it takes to understand that it already happened. And this attempt of how to is a delayed reaction. So this is what is understood as realizing the nature of non-self. This is what also understood in many traditions as surrendering to the will of. This is what, by definition, is the job. There are different degrees, of course. Different degrees, different strokes for different folks. Everyone is in different place. But at some point, sooner or later, there will come a moment when the inner work really has to begin. And the inner work here is that. There's no other. There's no other. There's no other work. You see? In other words, heaven is never stormed by the amount of knowledge one is equipped with. Knowledge is useless when it comes to that, what is already one's state. It is useful in the horizontal affairs of life. It's absolutely useful, this, that. Knowledge of so many diversified fields. All of this is useful, from how to cook rice to how to make a good katana. It's useful. But when it comes to that question, the final question, the real work, is useless. Useless because it's a different kind of knowledge. Therefore, the real work unfolds from that place where one realizes that everything is that delayed reaction. The whole life can become that delayed reaction of otherwise life is streaming through us as that. You could argue then, rightly so, that that is the very novel and noble idea of living life seamlessly. That is what is the rich account of this and that. And every culture is bringing us as a reminder that it is possible. Indeed, not it is only possible. It is why we're here for. When that delayed reaction is no longer. When that is a seamless state. And it's irrespective of what rising. Because that, if you will, I'll give you a footnote. When someone walks on the pavement and suddenly trips, right? The most natural reaction will be to look and see and maybe go back and examine, what did I trip on? And if there happen to be people, it's like, gosh, this is like, oh, this is really uneven tiles here. This is like really old town, gosh. You know, a place of tripping. You know? It has no purpose, no meaning whatsoever. It's a psychological response. You tripped on something, you look back and you say, oh, what is it that I tripped on? It's a delayed reaction which requires this. No! It's this desire to articulate for oneself what is already there, essentially, happened. And this is not to dismiss all this, what also on the horizontal plane of life is inseparable from the necessities to know how, okay, light doesn't work, why doesn't it work? Well, let's look at it. Let's make it work. Water doesn't run, let's see if the pipes are blocked or maybe electricity is when fuses off.
Is it the same for if I see behavior inside of me that leads to pain or disharmony? If I take that into full attention, do you also consider that as like the part of tripping, dismissible, and just say surrender completely to life? Or are there some aspects that I can give more attention to so that I can resolve it and in the root of my own personality to solve it and to go on further, or is that still a part of not surrendering?
There is this Arab proverb, and Rumi used it in his verse. It's quite well known. The proverb is, trust Allah but tie the camel. Right? Trust Allah but tie the camel. In other words, you know, for the journey, for the wayfarer, for whoever that is, right? You dismount for a night, you made a camp, you trust in God, but you tie your camel so it doesn't wander around. But Rumi, of course, made a mince pie out of that proverb, because his is the job of a spiritual teacher. And he made really a deal, really, he like destroyed that proverb completely. How utterly hypocritical it is in its essence. Not that you don't tie your camel, but trust Allah and tie your camel is already an act of a hypocrite. You see? Therefore, in some cultures, there was no even a word for a lock on a door. It was not even in their consciousness that the door need to be locked. You see? The term lock did not exist in the language. So let this be a key for you. Because the door is always open. The door is always open. It's more of a gate. Like this Zen Buddhist or Taoistic gates, right? They stand in nature. They do not separate two spaces. There was nothing. It's not a ruin of some unfinished or old or unfinished building. It's a gate. It symbolizes that, which otherwise does not separate anything. It's just on the hill, in the valley, whatever. That gate is there. You pass through that gate. It's there to articulate that moment. It is and it is not. And that's what it symbolizes. It's very telling. It's a profound experience, in fact. You go through it, but you do not come from another place going into yet place different from the one you just left or wandered from, wandered off. So that, you see, recognition that whatever rises, already from the start, when the real inner work begins, and it is only for the one who is given to that inner work and not for the other. It cannot be given to someone as a homework because it's totally different mathematics. It does not at all, or rather different laws of physics. It cannot be given to someone who is not ready to do that job. And yet, in terms of spiritual maturity, that is the most important passing through. Passing through that gate. The gate that articulates, does not divide, does not separate. It stands in the middle of the same landscape. There's no interior or exterior. That's what it says. That's what it speaks of. That's what it communicates. Then the inner, it's already the outer, and the outer is already the inner. It becomes the rite of passage. It becomes that act of initiation. Nothing happens. That nothing is everything. Other than that, everything else is a delayed reaction. And the whole life is just that, a delayed reaction. Nothing ever happened. That's what it is. It's a delayed reaction. It's already took place. Sometimes I said that before, and I'll bring it in here, that through the words or through the mouth of public figures, favorite poets, musicians, actors, some words of wisdom fly out if there are not enough scriptures perhaps being read, or not enough people contemplating the wisdom. This line from John Lennon, life is what happens to us whilst we are busy making other plans. It's a great line. I don't know, it's a greater line than anything I've heard in Bob Dylan songs. It's a profound wisdom. Everything is said in that. It's a flippant Taoistic phrase. I bet it's something Lao Tzu forgot to write in. And John Lennon got a download and but before it takes place, of course, there is this trial and error. And we want to get at the bottom of it. And of course, we want to do our work. Of course, we want to do our work. We want to own this process. But I want to remind you something that perhaps you already have heard me speaking at other gatherings. Is that one of the perhaps uniqueness of our time is that the spiritual teachings that are by now, widely adopted in the West, that came from the East, throughout not that long period of time, only within something like maybe 150 years roughly, más o menos. Most of these teachings already at the start have the premises which are not born in a secular culture, but applied in a secular culture. In other words, the premises of these teachings already at the start come from a place where the realization of non-self is a matter of fact. One just have to get it one way or the other, either through bhajans and completely sing oneself to oblivion, or through this utterly discriminative attitude, or to simply transcend oneself to nothing. One way or the other, one has to do that, what one already knows what it is. You see, it's granted, it's given. Whereas the culture where these teachings took hold on have very different premises. What the West is trying to do, what our globalized culture is trying to do, is to yet implement this teaching into the very, very, essentially, in the climate of this secular culture. It's trying to utilize this teaching. That's why this teaching enjoy mostly success and large following when they are applied therapeutically. Because one wants to get something out of these teachings. The one who meant to realize the nature of the non-self wants to get something out of these teachings. The premise is already from a different place. You see? How many people want to see God and be gone? How many people out there? And yet, it's a prerequisite. You want to see God? Say goodbye to yourself here and now. You want to know God? It's the same thing. You want love of God? That's what it is. Love of God means your own is gone. One way or the other. It cannot coexist. You cannot pour the new wine into the old container. It's throughout. And yet, just like we're going to take that teaching and furnish our life. We'll furnish our life. If it doesn't work, there's many other teachings we can choose from. Because it fits the purpose. It's fit the purpose of glorifying that, essentially, non-existent pseudo-self. But that's another story, you see? That's why work will continue, and when questions like this rise, we don't miss an occasion.